Hi, my name is Esther Narioshi. I am a surface designer and illustrator. Normally, I teach illustration, but in this video, I'm going to show you how to make a simple face mask, both for adults and for children. This video is great for someone who has a very basic understanding of sewing. As you can see, the final result has a bit of contour, which gives you a pretty good seal as a fabric mask. Disclaimer ahead, this is not a PPE, which means personal protection equipment, but it does give you about 50% filtration, according to CDC. My husband and I designed a pattern that only have straight lines. I've also avoided pinning because it's really easy to align the fabric when everything is straight, which also saves a lot of time cutting. And all of these features are really beginner friendly. And I have also included both sizes for adults as well as kids. So let's go ahead and grab the free PDF and let's get to work. First, let's talk about materials. You can find the free printout for the pattern as well as the material checklist in the description box. We will need 2 pieces of 9 by 6 inches of cotton fabric. If you're making masks for kids, the fabric should be cut to 7.5 by 5 inches. We will also need some elastic, but if you don't have it, we can also replace it with ribbons or knit fabric or like t-shirt fabric. I will use a spandex fabric here because it's really stretchy and the edges doesn't fray, which is great because your masks are going to get washed a lot in high temperature. And of course, we want them to be very durable. We will need a sewing machine or a sewing kit if you plan to hand sew, some thread, and some cutting tools. It doesn't have to be super fancy. Whatever that can cut through fabric will be great. Last but not least, having an iron will be super helpful, but this one is optional. For the fabric, if you're able, choose 2 contrasting colors so that you can tell which side is interior and the other one is exterior. Fold the fabric in half and iron it. Keep the fold on the right. It's easier to work with our pattern that way. And we will need 2 pieces of that. As you may see, the pretty side, which is the right side, is facing inward. If the sides are confusing for you, just go ahead and pick 2 solid colors, because for solids, there's no right or wrong sides. Next step, we're gonna cut our print pattern and put it on top of our fabric. Just make sure you have the perfect alignment for the fold line. Next step, we're gonna cut off those corners. And once you're done with cutting, we can bring them to the sewing machine. Our seam allowance here is 1/4 inch. As you can see, it's indicated by the dotted line. And our fabric looks something like this. And we're gonna sew 1/4 inch seam allowance at the top 2 edges. I'm gonna use some basic straight stitch for this task. And my stitch length is 2.4. You want to keep it as small as possible because they will give your mask extra endurance. Begin with a back stitch so that your stitches don't unravel. And you also want to end with a back stitch for the same reason. You want to keep your masks as durable as possible. And you want to raise your presser foot so that you can turn the corner to the right angle. Back stitch and cut your threads. If you open the fabric from the left, it kind of looks like a tent. That's exactly what we want. You can set it aside and do the exactly same thing for the second piece of fabric. And once you're done with that, we want to turn the lighter piece of fabric inside out and align the 2 pieces together. We want to make sure the seams roughly align and just look for the corner points. Once you align the corners, the middle part will automatically align. And it doesn't have to be perfect at this point, so don't stress too much about it. Now we have a little tent with 2 pieces of fabric, the pretty side facing each other. Looking at our little tent, we're gonna sew from the very bottom. Skipping ahead a little bit, this is the final result we wanna have. We have the stitched side at the top, but we're gonna start sewing from the bottom. at about a third position from right to left. And we're going to go around clockwise. And as we meet each corner, we're going to place our elastic or our tie or ribbon inside and then just go around it. And eventually at the bottom, we want to leave about 2 inches opening so we can turn our fabrics right side out. Jumping back to reality, let's divide the bottom to 3 and we start from the first third. At this point, you want to make sure the side that you're sewing is perfectly aligned. Again, start with your back stitch and you can stop right before you meet the corner so we can put our elastic or ribbons in. So stop your sewing machine and grab one of the elastic or ribbons and just use your 3 fingers to kind of tie around it until you have a long tail. The reason why I want to do that is that I don't want my long elastic to get tangled and accidentally get sewn into the wrong places. So I want the whole thing to be in bulk, nested in the corner, only with the tail sticking out. And once that's taken care of, I want to raise my presser foot and then turn the corner. So I'm basically sewing a sandwich here. We have fabric, elastic, and fabric. And for the next 3 corners, we're going to do exactly the same thing so that we can place our elastic in all 4 corners. When you're turning the corner, you might want to slow down a bit because it's a little bit tricky to navigate. But if you're familiar with how your sewing machine is working, go ahead and just sail through the whole process. So I stopped right before I reached the corner so I can stuff my elastic in and then I can sew it through. But this is not scientific at all. So if you're off by ½ inch, there's no problem. Because it's elastic and how the pattern is designed, it will still fit well on your face. Between the second and the third elastic, you will sew through the stitched side. It might be a little tricky because things can get pretty bulky, so you want to turn one side of seam left, the other side right, so you're not sewing through 6 layers of fabric. And you can also slow down when you go through the thicker part of the fabric. And again, if you take care of your corner points, make sure they align. Since we only have straight lines, whenever 2 points align, whatever in between will also align as well. These fabrics that I'm using have special place in my heart. They are from my first fabric design collection that's called Underwood Stories with Cloud9 Fabrics. And I happen to have tons of yardage at home as one of the perks for a designer. There are 10 different prints in one same collection, and there are 2 different colorways. I've used one of the colorways for quilts and small bags, and this time I get to use different prints for masks. Alright, back to sewing. And once you're done with the very last elastic, and you want to turn a corner and sew maybe about 2 more inches, but you don't want to sew all the way back to where we started. We want to leave about 2 inches opening, so we have space to turn our fabrics around. Just remember to backstitch before you stop so that our seams don't bust open. We're gonna go ahead and turn our fabric around. And you can use your fingers to make sure the corners are well turned and things are kind of flat. You can press it with a hot iron for a more polished look, but it's highly optional. And you can gently tug in the opening so they are at the same level as the rest of the fabric. Finally, we're going to pick a spot and just sew straight stitch around. And this time our seam allowance is maybe about 1/8 of an inch. So the purpose of that is to close the opening, but also add some reinforcement to our edges. And you do want to make sure the elastics are out of your way so you don't accidentally sew through them. And we're done here. If you were to wash a bunch of them together, I would highly recommend you tie a simple knot for your elastic so that they don't get tangled together. Well, that's all I have for you guys. I hope everyone stays safe and stay healthy. Take care.